I don't foresee whites against blacks. I don't foresee Christians against Muslims.
The most important fissure is between nationalism and post-nationalism. Almost invariably, they will assert themselves on ethnic lines.
Once that violence hits, we go back to our animal instincts, which is tribalism. If we are in a civil war, and if it's going to get worse, who are going to be the sides? You know, the three examples I gave then was disaffected drivers, Islamists, and eco-greens. Where are these fractures going to occur? Is it going to be, I don't foresee whites against blacks. I don't foresee Christians against Muslims. How's it going to play out? Who are going to be the enemies, or is it going to be like Mogadishu, where it's tribal, and you can split it into 15 different groups, or is it going to be two groups like the royalists and the parliamentarians in our first civil war? How's that looking?
Well, it's very sad when you think about it, but let me explain what I think is going to happen. It's sad because I think fundamentally the most important fissure is between nationalism and post-nationalism. Nationalism is in bad odor and has been, in elite circles since the World Wars, really. But essentially, if one understands it as a love of one's place and people, and then that idea, I think that idea is one that appeals to Britons across a range of ethnicities. And so, I mean, the problem is, and if you think of it that way, then the problem is that we have our elite, our political media, certainly our corporate elite, they're all post-nationalist in their orientation. They don't think in terms of national interest. In fact, they're suspicious of people who talk about national interest. They think there's something actually disreputable about that. Rather suspicious, and basically morally suspect to talk in those terms.
And Keir Starmer perfectly highlighted this when someone asked him on the BBC, "What do you prefer, Davos or Westminster?" And he went, "Davos."
Keir Starmer is the epitomization of this, I think. But I mean, he's hardly alone. I mean, he's an epitomization of an ideal that is very broadly, I think, evident throughout the British establishment. I apologize for this. I have an elderly dog at my feet here. So, in essence, one might say, in the first instance, the conflict is between the post-nationalist elite and the remaining nationalist community. Let's call it society. But I don't think it's going to remain that way, and that's because of the deranging effect of violence. Once things tip over into violence, then it becomes much more difficult for people to exercise essentially what's known in the jargon as bridging capital. Bridging capital is the kind of capital that exists within a society that allows otherwise disparate groups, to work together to see commonality despite whatever superficial differences there may be. Once the violence breaks out and people are fleeing the cities because they're falling apart, they'll begin to sort themselves, and almost invariably they will sort themselves on ethnic lines, which is why it's so sad, why it's so depressing, and what's being set off is a chain of events that, by any definition, is tragic and offensive to almost everyone in the country, barring a handful of extremists. But the truth of the matter is that it's perfectly obvious, perfectly well understood to extremists on both sides how to take small fractures in society and tear them into giant chasms. That's all. This far into the war on terror, people understand how to do that. They will begin to do it.
Interesting. Now because you've said it out loud, I'm now thinking you're right. Once that violence hits, we go back to our animal instincts, which is tribalism, and it's like, I need to be.
You use the word tribal, and I think that is the correct one. I mean, within the social sciences, within academia, people have been talking about tribalization and retribalization for a long time. Again, it's not terribly controversial. The controversial bit of it is when you simply, when you connect the dots between the developments, this tribalization which is occurring in society. And again, just perfectly obvious. I mean, perfectly obviously, I think it's only controversial when you connect the dots. The individual elements, I mean, they're all well understood. I have no doubt that many of your listeners, for a lot of your listeners, everything I'm saying is pretty obvious. For some of your listeners, it's just glaringly obvious. And for some, perhaps it's not so obvious, but I think most people perceive the things that I perceive occurring, the things that I've just mentioned. They just perhaps haven't heard them articulated in a particular manner.
No, spot on. I think that's it. When you hear people say things, sometimes automatically you say to yourself, I know that to be true. I've just not articulated myself. I've not heard anybody else put the case for it. But deep down inside, I know that's true because I feel it to be true.